Hello, Redemption Church. Pastor Daniel Davis here again with Sean Nelson. We are doing our question and answer video for Proverbs and biblical wisdom on politics and power. How should Christians think about these things and pursue skill in the art of godly living as it pertains to a lot of the questions and it's an election year, right?
Yeah.
So
Very
it's on our minds. I mean, we just had a voting day earlier this week. So people are thinking about these questions all the time, and it's become a really powerful cultural force. Is just our political persuasions. And so we had several questions come in, and we're just going to try to handle these things as best we can.
So let's look at our questions. There are a lot of commonalities in these questions, so we may group some together. As you said, it's an election year. These issues are pressing, and it does seem like a lot of Christians feel politically homeless right now.
Yeah.
Neither party seems to be representing what they view as the best way forward, and so a lot of our questions reflect that. I'll try to kind of combine some of these into a single question, but should Christians who feel politically homeless, who don't agree with either of the candidates on a ballot, or who don't feel like either of the two major parties represent their interests or their values or their conscience, should they vote for a third-party candidate? Should they vote for a third-party candidate even if they feel like that's a wasted vote? Or should they, as somebody has put it, hold their nose and pick the lesser of two evils? Or is that even an option for us? Are we allowed to pick the lesser of two evils as Christians?
Yeah. Man, what an easy question. Thanks,
yeah, I know.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, these are, I think this sort of like group of questions here really does, a lot of us are right there, you know, where there's a lot of disillusionment. I think the numbers are really high where, as far as people who don't like either political candidates, it's really high this year more than any other year. And so I'm right there with you. So if you sent this question, I'm right there with you. Like I'm wondering what is the way forward here, and it's tempting for me to just tell you to do what I think. That's kind of like, when I get a question like this, it's tempting for me as a pastor to just be like, well, here's what I would do. I want you to do the thing that I would do. But where I am comes from a lot of thought and prayer and learning about these things. And so the first thing I would ask you to do is to allow your conscience to be formed by the scriptures. I think our political conscience is so often bound up in the political mechanisms of our country and culture that we spend so much time listening to non-believers and professional politicians and news networks and social media algorithms form our thoughts and consciences around these issues, and it's created real blind spots for us on both sides of the aisle, where we're just like, we're blind to where our hearts are really hard around issues of human suffering and vulnerability, or really hard around what is political power for, and how should it be pursued. And so what I want to plead with you first is like, do the work of searching the scriptures and like cultivating a life before God that says like, I want what you want. I don't want what these political parties want. I want what you want. And just allowing God to reshape our conscience in such a way that when we are confronted with the Republican Party saying, vote for us and here's why, and the Democratic Party saying, vote for us and here's why, that we can look at those things and think, is this representative of what God has told me is good and beautiful and true? And then if it's not, then I have to take meaningful action. I have to use the voice that I have. That's one of the we were talking about earlier, kind of offline, that we have a different place to sit in this government than the biblical worldview was imagining, because as monarchies and dictatorships and all these things, like we are in a representative democracy here, and we have a vote. We have the capacity to make our voice known and use our lives well. And so once your conscience is biblically formed, then allow that conscience to move you into a meaningful engagement with the political movement. And sometimes that could mean, man, I can't conscience voting for either party. Maybe I do vote for a third party, because my conscience won't allow me to engage. Maybe it's otherwise. Maybe you feel my conscience, I don't like either of these candidates. I feel like there's some problems, but this is what I feel like I need to vote for. And so I'm not going to try to tell you one way or the other on that. But I think a lot of it would be solved if we just developed a more biblically informed conscience, and if we stayed away from like the truly polarizing, idea shaping influences of our culture.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best advice you could give someone is let your thoughts in the political realm first and foremost be formed by the Bible, and not by whatever YouTube channel you watch, whatever news network you watch. Because I've met so many people who their political vision is shaped not by Scripture, not by godly priorities, not by biblical wisdom, but by cultural wisdom. And they don't even realize it. They've somehow incorporated that into their idea of what biblical wisdom is, and at times it's even polar opposite. So let the Bible speak first, and then let it shape your conscience and follow it. I think that's a great answer. All right, so our next questions kind of try to deal with how do we interact with people in the realm of politics. So first, someone asks, how do I love a spouse? And I guess you can expand this to brother, sister, friend, anything, whose whole life deals with politics. It feels like a pretty common question, because it's become such an all-encompassing, there's so much content, there's so much concern around these issues that it really can kind of dominate a person's life and heart in ways that you feel like, man, I can't talk to this person without talking about politics. And it can be discouraging because you want to have a multi-dimensional relationship with somebody, so let me talk to you all the time about the most depressing thing possible. Right?
It's a bummer. It's a bummer. And so first is, if that's somebody that you are in contact with, like, that's a really sad thing to have your whole life dominated by earthly politics. And so the first thing is just pray for that person. Like, just really pray for God to give relief from. I mean, it's a kind of suffering in some ways. It's just like to live under the cloud of like, and really being like living under a false gospel that there's some sort of earthly government or politics that is going to save us. It's just not. It's not going to work. And so I would encourage privately, just praying for that person consistently that God would move, and then looking for opportunities to make your relationship about more than that. Sometimes like literally just go do something fun together. Take that relationship and say, hey, you know what? Let's go to an Astros game or something, where like I'm going to be in a different context. And I'm going to remember that life is more than this thing. And really just in reminding when those issues of politics come up, one of the things that I like to tell people is like the biggest political problem in the world is that the prince of the power of the air has captured the hearts and minds of the world, right? There's a real enemy of God. There's a spiritual battle happening in the heavenly places that we can't see, and we have a king who's conquered that that spiritual ruler, those spiritual forces, and we can follow that king. And so just reframing the political conversation and bringing King Jesus into the picture.
Yeah.
I think that really helps right size our earthly politics when I bring King Jesus into the conversation and remind us, hey, like this is the real reality. Like it's not just Democrats and Republicans. It's not just the global geopolitics of our time. It is literally, there is a King of Kings and Lord of Lords ruling over history, and He loves us, and He's with us. And if He's for us, who can be against us? And there's a peace that can come from reminding myself of the real political situation I'm in as a citizen of the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah,
as with most things in the Christian life, peace comes from looking first to Christ.
Absolutely.
So that's good advice. Second question is, how do I love those on the other side of the aisle from me? So assuming you have a side on the political aisle, how do you love those on the other side?
Yeah, that's a great question. And a really important question.
Yeah.
Jesus said, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying people on the other side of the political aisle are your enemies, but sometimes we treat them like that.
Yeah.
We think of them as our enemies.
Yeah, it's a very encouraging question in a way, because not many people today are asking, how do I love those who disagree with me politically?
Yeah. So good job, whoever asked this question. And it's an important thing to really pursue. Like, I think if you were to just sit down and talk about these things, like, and like really, I would encourage a posture of being unoffendable. Like if you could like just go into that, I'm going to try to not be offended, but try to be really curious.
Yeah.
And just ask people like, how did you come to these conclusions, or like, where did you learn this, or like, why is this important to you? I think listening to other people can really help correct a lot of assumptions we have. Like in the absence of information, we make judgments and we jump to conclusions. And part of loving someone is just listening to them, just listening to their story, listening to what they love and what they value. And certainly there's going to be places where there's a disconnect between how they see the world and how you see the world. But the more information you have, the more compassion you can have, and then also the more skillfully and beautifully you can share like your story and your perspective into their lives, and let it be from a place of love and understanding, and not like at a distance kind of shooting bullets across the way.
Here's why you're so stupid for believing what you believe. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think I would just encourage listening and spending time, and again, like maybe going to an Astros game. Like again, letting that relationship exist apart from politics, like not letting that be the only thing that you're trying to connect with somebody who's in a different persuasion than you.
Yeah. Okay, lastly, you said in the sermon something pretty interesting, and it seems to have triggered a question, but there's a lot of people who are choosing churches today not because of what the church believes or teaches, but where the church stands on certain political issues, or just kind of the general feel of that church's culture and congregation, where they might be at politically.
Yeah.
So why are people choosing politics over theology when it comes to choosing a church?
Yeah. And as you ask the question, it really does make me think back to the first conversation we had just in this video, was our consciences are being formed by secular political conversations. You know what I mean? So like the more our consciences are being formed by extra biblical realities, like our conversations, the less the Bible will have to do with how we're navigating any decision.
Yep.
And so of course that'll bleed into the church, right? That if the way that I'm viewing the world is politically is primarily through political lenses, then that'll bleed into the way that I see churches, and that's what we're seeing over and over again. And in a world that's so, in a country that's so politically polarized, we can start to even see the local church in polarized political lenses. And I mean, I love the imagery that the church is an embassy of the kingdom of heaven, that this is the church, the people of the church. We are not primarily like Americans. We are primarily citizens of the kingdom of heaven.
Yep.
And in that way, like our communion transcends politics, like earthly politics.
Yep.
And so, and we're identified as a, in some ways, theologically, like who we are is formed by who God is and what He has done. And so I just want to call people back to informing your consciences through the Scriptures and not through political lenses. And it's sad to me that, there have been people who've left this church because they thought we were too far left on one thing or too far right on another thing, and people have left on political grounds and for political reasons. When the question we should be asking is this true?
Yeah.
Like, is what's being said like biblical and true and good? And so I'm hopeful that we can correct for that, but it really is a symptom of that problem of having poorly formed consciences.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's the end of our video on questions and answers regarding politics. And so I hope that it's been helpful to you in gaining skill in the art of godly living.